I never thought my marriage would come to this. Not after all the years we spent together, the memories, the promises, the life we built. But sometimes the things you discover in the quietest moments, in the most ordinary places, can change everything. It happened on a simple afternoon. I wasn't looking for secrets, I wasn't snooping. I was just doing what I always did, tidying up, making sure everything was in order. My husband had left his car parked in the driveway, the sun warming the metal, and I thought, why not clean it for him? It was nothing more than an act of care. At least that's how it began. But as I bent down, brushing away the dust from under the passenger seat, my hand touched something small. A tube, hidden where most wouldn't notice. And when I pulled it into the light, my heart stopped. A tube of lubricant. In that instant, my world shifted. Questions rushed in. Why was it there? Who was it for? What was he hiding from me? But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled. Quietly. Because in that moment, I knew my silence would be louder than any words. I placed the tube back, but not as it was. I replaced it with something that would change everything. And what happened after, well, it ended with flashing lights, panicked neighbors, and an ambulance pulling up to our home. But before I tell you what unfolded, let me take you back to that moment, because everything began with what I found under that car seat. I woke up that morning with no suspicion, no dark thoughts lingering in the back of my mind. It was just another ordinary day, the kind of day you almost forget as soon as it ends. The sun poured in through the kitchen window, warm and golden, the kind of light that makes dust motes dance in the air. I made my coffee the way I always did, 1 sugar, a little cream, and sat at the table listening to the faint hum of the neighborhood starting its day. Cars passing, kids on bikes, the distant bark of a dog. It was peaceful, quiet, predictable. After breakfast, I glanced out the window and noticed my husband's car parked at an angle in the driveway. He'd been rushing the evening before and left it that way, a little crooked. The windows were streaked with dust, and a few leaves had gathered in the wiper blades. It looked tired, neglected, and I thought to myself, I should give it a good clean. It wasn't unusual. I'd done it before. It was my way of keeping things in order, of making sure our lives didn't look messy from the outside. That's who I was, someone who quietly held things together. I slipped on a pair of old gloves, grabbed a bucket, and walked out. The late morning air was warm, but not stifling, the kind of weather that makes chores feel manageable. As I opened the driver's side door, a faint smell of leather and old coffee cups greeted me. The seat was warm from the sun, and I smiled at the thought of my husband rushing to work, probably spilling crumbs in the process, too busy to notice. I began with the dashboard, wiping away the thin film of dust. Each stroke of the cloth was rhythmic, almost soothing. The radio knobs were sticky, fingerprints on the glass, a forgotten receipt tucked by the gear shift. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just the everyday mess of a man's car. I hummed to myself as I collected the trash, gum wrappers, a gas station coffee cup, a few coins rolling under the mat. I moved slowly, methodically, the way you do when you're not in a rush. My mind wandered to dinner plans, to whether I should pick up groceries later. Everything was so normal, so routine. It wasn't until I leaned into the passenger seat that things shifted. I bent down, pushing my hand between the seat and the floor mat, searching for anything that might have slipped. That's when my fingers brushed against something smooth, something cylindrical. I paused, curious, thinking it was just another pen or maybe a tube of hand cream. I pulled it out, expecting something ordinary, but what I held in my hand was anything but ordinary. A tube of lubricant. For a moment, my brain refused to register it. I stared at it, my heart thudding in my chest, the world around me suddenly silent. The hum of the neighborhood disappeared. The sunlight that had felt warm now seemed harsh. My throat went dry. What is this doing here? The thought slammed into me, heavy and unrelenting. I turned the tube over in my hand, staring at the label, reading and rereading the words as if they would change. But they didn't. It was exactly what I thought it was. My stomach tightened. A sickening mix of suspicion and betrayal crept into me like poison. My husband didn't need this. Not for me, not for us. We hadn't spoken about it, hadn't laughed about it, hadn't bought it together. Which meant it wasn't for us at all. I sat back in the seat, the tube trembling in my hand. I thought of his smile, the way he kissed me on the cheek before leaving the house. I thought of the years we'd spent building a life together, the trust I had given him without hesitation. And now this object, hidden like a dirty little secret, tucked under the seat of his car where he thought I'd never look. A part of me wanted to storm inside right then and there, to throw the tube in his face, to demand answers, to shout until the neighbors heard every word. But another part of me, a deeper part, told me to wait, to stay quiet, to hold on to my dignity. Because silence can be louder than any scream. I placed the tube on the seat beside me and leaned back, staring at it. My thoughts swirled. Who was it for? Where had he been using it? Was he with someone else? How long had this been going on? Each question was like a knife twisting deeper into me. And yet, even in that storm of emotions, I felt an odd calmness, a strange clarity. This was a revelation, but it was also an opportunity. I realized in that moment that words wouldn't give me the justice I wanted. Confrontations rarely do. They lead to excuses, denials, blame shifting. He'd lie, or worse, he'd admit the truth. And either way, I would be left shattered. No, this wasn't going to be about screaming or crying. This was going to be about control. About teaching him that betrayal doesn't go unnoticed, that secrets always have a way of surfacing. I sat there for a long time, holding the tube, running my thumb across the label. It felt cold in my hand, foreign, heavy with implication. I thought back to the early years of our marriage, when trust was simple, when I believed his every word, when I never once imagined I'd be sitting in his car, questioning everything. And the hurt cut deep. Trust, once broken, is like glass. You can try to piece it back together, but the cracks will always show. Dignity, though, that was mine to protect. I would not lower myself to shouting matches or desperate pleas. I would not be the wife begging for honesty from a man who had already chosen lies. Instead, I decided on silence, on patience, on letting him write his own downfall with the very secret he thought he'd hidden. As I placed the tube back under the seat, exactly where I found it, a calm smile spread across my face. He wouldn't know that I knew. He wouldn't suspect a thing. And that, I realized, was the greatest power I held. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I continued cleaning the car, though my hands moved slower, my mind elsewhere. Each crumb I brushed away, each piece of trash I collected felt insignificant compared to the secret lying beneath the passenger seat. The air seemed heavier, the sunlight harsher, the world a little less kind. But beneath it all, I carried a quiet strength. Because while my trust may have been shaken, my dignity remained intact. I had discovered the hidden truth, and now the choice was mine, not his. And in that silence, in that decision not to confront but to wait, I felt something shift inside me. Something stronger than anger, something colder than grief. It was the beginning of a plan, though I didn't know it yet. All I knew was this: I would not be the fool he thought I was. I stepped back from the car, bucket in hand, and looked at it sitting in the driveway. To anyone else, it was just a vehicle, just another man's car. But to me, it was now a vault of secrets, a symbol of betrayal. And hidden beneath that passenger seat was the proof that my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I closed the door gently, almost lovingly, and whispered to myself, He has no idea what he's done. But soon, he will. And with that, I carried my bucket back inside, my face calm, my heart steady, my mind sharper than it had ever been before. I didn't speak a word that evening. Not at dinner, not while he was flipping through television channels, not even when he kissed me goodnight with the same casual affection he always had. If he noticed the silence in my eyes, he didn't say so. And I didn't offer him any clues. On the surface, I was the same wife I had always been. Calm, steady, predictable. But inside, a storm was building, and it wasn't the kind that lashes out with thunder and lightning. No, this was the quiet kind, the kind that gathers strength silently, unnoticed, until it strikes with devastating precision. I had made my decision. I would not confront him. I would not beg for answers or demand explanations that would likely be wrapped in lies. He had hidden something from me, something ugly, something shameful, and in doing so, he had underestimated me. He believed I was blind, that I would never look closely enough to see what he was hiding. But he was wrong. And now I held the power. That night, as he slept peacefully beside me, his breath slow and steady, I stared at the ceiling and let my mind wander. I imagined all the ways I could respond, screaming at him, throwing the tube on the table, packing a suitcase, and leaving. But none of those ideas satisfied me. None of them gave me the justice I wanted. They would make me look weak, emotional, broken. No, that wasn't me. If he wanted to keep secrets, then I would show him what secrets could do. The idea came slowly at first, like a flicker of light in a dark room. My mind kept circling back to the object itself, the tube hidden under the seat. It was his secret, his shame, the evidence of betrayal. And it occurred to me that the best way to make him suffer wasn't to expose it immediately, but to let it turn against him. A cruel smile crept across my face in the dark. What if I didn't throw it away? What if I didn't confront him at all? What if, instead, I made sure that when he reached for it next, it wouldn't be what he thought it was? The thought sent a chill through me, equal parts fear and exhilaration. It was dangerous, wicked even, but it was also perfect. I didn't have to say a word. I didn't have to accuse him. I would let his own secret become his punishment. I whispered to myself, almost inaudibly, I'll replace it. I'll replace it with the glue. And once I said the words, the plan cemented itself in my mind. The following morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. Coffee, laundry, a quick phone call to my sister. I laughed when I was supposed to, smiled at the right times. He had no idea, but inside my mind was racing with details, planning every step of what I was about to do. First, I needed the right glue. Not the kind you buy for school projects or fixing a broken mug, but something stronger. Industrial strength. The kind that binds without mercy, that turns flexibility into permanence. Something that wouldn't just surprise him. It would trap him, humiliate him, leave him helpless. I drove into town, stopping at a hardware store. I remember the way the man behind the counter smiled politely as he rang me up. He had no idea that the bottle of adhesive in my basket wasn't for a simple household repair, but for a revenge I could never speak aloud. I felt almost giddy, as though I was carrying a delicious secret inside me, one that no one else in the world could guess. Back at home, I tucked the bag away until I was alone. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator. I waited until my husband left for work before I finally retrieved the items. I sat at the kitchen table, the tube of lubricant in one hand, the bottle of glue in the other. My heart raced as I unscrewed the cap. The glue had a sharp chemical scent that stung my nose. It was thick, sticky, unyielding. I dipped a toothpick inside, carefully testing the consistency, then began the delicate work of transferring it. It took time, steady hands, patience, and focus. I worked in silence, the only sound the faint squelch of liquid being squeezed into a new home. My mind was clear, sharp, as though the rest of the world had fallen away. There was only me, the tube, and the promise of justice. When I was finished, I wiped the outside clean until it looked untouched, innocent, exactly as it had before. To anyone's eyes, it was the same tube he had hidden under the seat. But I knew better. Inside, it was no longer a tool for his betrayal. It was my weapon. I held it up to the light, admiring my work, and felt a rush of triumph. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't crying, I wasn't pleading with him for honesty. No, I was something far more dangerous. I was silent. Silent, patient, and ready. I returned the tube to its place, sliding it carefully under the passenger seat. My hands didn't shake. My breath was steady. It was almost frightening how calm I felt, how certain. And as I closed the car door and stepped back, a single thought filled my mind. It's only a matter of time. That was the thrill of it, the suspense, the waiting. I knew eventually he would reach for it. I knew eventually the secret he thought was hidden would become the trap that ensnared him. And I didn't need to lift a finger when that happened. The work was already done. For the rest of the day, I carried myself as if nothing had changed. I folded laundry, watered the plants, and even prepared his favorite meal for dinner. When he sat across from me at the table, laughing at a story from work, I smiled back as though nothing was wrong. He believed me, utterly and completely. And that belief made my silence even sweeter. Every time I looked at him, I thought of what was waiting for him in the car. Every casual kiss on the cheek, every harmless word out of his mouth, only deepened my satisfaction. Because he thought he had fooled me. He thought I was blind. But I knew. And soon, so would he. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes. Betrayal, of course, but also anticipation. The kind of anticipation that curls in your stomach, that keeps your mind alive with possibilities. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't impatient. I wanted the moment to come on its own, naturally when he least expected it. The trap was set, and I was content to wait, because I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth revealed itself. The thing about silence is that it fools people. When you don't scream, when you don't cry, when you don't accuse, they mistake your calmness for ignorance. They assume you don't know. And my husband, well, he had no idea. Days passed before it happened. Days of pretending, of smiling at him across the dinner table, of folding his shirts and listening to him talk about work. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath every casual conversation, every mundane chore, I carried a secret he couldn't see. I knew what he had hidden, and I knew what he would eventually find. It was late one evening when I sensed the shift. He came home later than usual, a faint smell of cologne clinging to him that wasn't the one I'd bought him. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, and there was a restless energy about him, the kind I had learned not to question out loud. I watched him move around the house, his eyes avoiding mine, his answers short and clipped. He was distracted, anxious, almost impatient. And in that moment, I knew. Tonight was the night. I went about my routine as though nothing was different. I washed the dishes, dried my hands on the towel, and made a show of yawning. "I think I'll turn in early," I said softly, my voice smooth even. He barely looked up, just nodded as though my presence, or absence, meant little. I walked to the bedroom, slipped under the covers, and let the minutes stretch out. My heart was steady, not racing the way I thought it might. There was no fear, no hesitation, only a deep, simmering anticipation. I listened. The creak of floorboards, the faint thud of his footsteps heading toward the door, the pause, the silence, and then the unmistakable sound of the car door opening outside. My breath caught, not in panic, but in triumph. The trap was being sprung. Through the thin curtain, I could see the faint glow of the car's interior light. His silhouette bent forward, reaching under the seat, retrieving the object I had so carefully prepared. My hand gripped the blanket tightly as I imagined it. The familiar squeeze of the tube, the expectation he carried, the trust he placed in his own secret. And then, I almost laughed at the thought of it. The first press of the tube in his hand, the stubborn resistance as the glue refused to flow like he expected. A small frown, confusion flashing across his face. He would try again, squeezing harder, shaking it, maybe tapping the bottom. But no matter how he tried, it wouldn't behave as it should. Because it wasn't what he thought it was anymore. I closed my eyes and pictured it perfectly, the slow realization creeping over him. The confusion first, then frustration, and finally, panic. The glue was thick, unyielding, clinging in ways he hadn't anticipated. His plan, his secret indulgence, had turned on him. I didn't need to see his face to know the expression he wore. The tightening jaw, the widening eyes, the flush of embarrassment as his private act spiraled into something he couldn't control. He thought he had hidden the tube so well. He thought it was his alone. But now it betrayed him, exposing him to himself in the cruelest way possible. And me? I lay in bed, calm as ever, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Every sound outside, the faint shuffle, the car door slamming shut, the hurried footsteps, was like music to me. Proof that my silence had spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. He came back inside eventually, moving quickly, almost frantically. His face was flushed, his hands clenched, and he avoided my gaze as though I might see the shame written all over him. He muttered something under his breath, an excuse, perhaps, though I couldn't make out the words. He disappeared into the bathroom, the door locking with a sharp click. I listened to the running water, the frantic rustle of paper, the frustrated grunts muffled by the walls. He was trying desperately to fix what couldn't be undone, to erase the evidence of his failure, his humiliation. And with every passing minute, my satisfaction grew. Because I didn't need to lift a finger. I didn't need to raise my voice. All I had to do was wait. That's the beauty of patience. Secrets always carry their own weight, and when you add just the right amount of pressure, they collapse under it. Later that night, he climbed into bed beside me. He didn't touch me, didn't speak to me. He lay stiff, rigid, as though proximity alone might expose him. I kept my breathing slow, steady, pretending to sleep. But inside, I was alive with victory. I thought about the look on his face when he realized the tube had betrayed him. I thought about the confusion that must have burned through him, the panic he tried so hard to hide, and I thought about the sweet irony of it all. He had hidden something from me, and in return, I had turned that very secret into his undoing. The satisfaction wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of triumph you shout about. It was quiet, deep, the kind that settles into your bones and warms you from the inside out. Because I knew this was only the beginning. But even if it had ended right there, even if all I had accomplished was that moment of confusion, that flicker of panic in his eyes, it would have been enough. Enough to prove that silence has power. Enough to remind me that dignity doesn't come from demanding answers. It comes from knowing them, from holding them in your heart while the other person stumbles blindly. And so I closed my eyes, turned slightly away from him, and let sleep take me. My plan had unfolded exactly as I intended. He thought he was the one in control, the one keeping secrets. But now he knew. Even if he couldn't admit it, even if he didn't dare speak it aloud, he knew something had shifted. And I was content, because I had seen the first consequence of betrayal. And it was only a matter of time before the rest came crashing down. The thing about secrets is that they always demand to be heard. You can hide them under floorboards, bury them beneath words, or tuck them under the seat of a car, But eventually they claw their way out, and when they do, they make more noise than you ever imagined. I had seen the first flicker of consequence in his eyes that night. The confusion, the panic, the shame he tried to swallow whole. But that was only the beginning. Because a secret that festers doesn't just stay hidden, it rots everything around it until the stench is too strong to ignore. And soon, his secret began to consume him. At first, he tried to act as though nothing had happened. He carried on with his daily routines, going to work, coming home, flipping on the television. But I could see it in the way he carried himself. Stiff, uneasy, restless. He avoided my eyes, avoided touch, avoided even the smallest gestures of normal life. His laughter, once loud and careless, became forced, brittle, like glass about to crack. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch between us like an ocean, wide and unending. But he couldn't bear it. One evening, I heard him in the bathroom long after he should have been in bed. The sound of the faucet running, drawers opening and closing, frantic movements muffled by the thin walls. I listened from the hallway, calm and still, while he muttered curses under his breath. He was searching for solutions, for ways to undo what had been done. But there was nothing he could fix. The damage was already written into his body, into his fear, into the panic that shadowed every step. He emerged pale, sweat beading his forehead, his shirt clinging damply to his skin. He brushed past me without a word, his eyes darting to the floor as though even the tiles might judge him. I followed him with my gaze, not my voice, letting the silence remind him that I knew, though I never once said it aloud. And that silence? It broke him. Because in the absence of my questions, in the absence of my accusations, his mind supplied them all on its own. He heard the words I never spoke. He saw the judgment in every quiet glance. He felt the weight of the truth pressing down harder with each passing day. Soon his composure crumbled completely. Late at night, I heard him pacing the living room, the floorboards creaking beneath his restless feet. He muttered to himself, fragments of sentences I couldn't fully catch. His voice was hoarse, urgent, broken. And then came the thuds, his fists striking the walls, the table, anything within reach. Anger mixed with fear, spilling out in violent bursts he could no longer contain. I lay in bed listening to it all. Calm, steady, unshaken, but the walls are thin. And secrets, once loud enough, don't just stay inside a home. They spill outward, into the world, into the ears of those who were never meant to hear them. The neighbors began to notice. It started with curious glances, lingering stares as we walked to the car or brought in the groceries. They'd heard something. Shouts, crashes, frantic noises cutting through the stillness of the night. And then, one evening, the screams erupted so violently that even I, prepared as I was, felt the tremor of it in my bones. He had lost control entirely. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, the sound of water rushing steady and calm, when his voice tore through the house. A raw, guttural scream of frustration and pain, so loud it rattled the windows. I froze, not out of fear but out of recognition. This was the moment when his carefully built facade collapsed completely. He screamed again, words tumbling out between gasps, though they made little sense. Accusations hurled into the empty air, curses spat at ghosts that only he could see. He slammed doors, threw objects, his footsteps frantic as he stumbled from room to room, a man consumed by something he couldn't name aloud. I didn't run to him. I didn't plead with him to stop. Instead, I dried my hands on a towel, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. My movements were slow, deliberate, a quiet contrast to the storm raging only a few steps away. And as the chaos grew louder, I grew calmer, because this was exactly what I had known would happen. A secret doesn't destroy itself in silence. It explodes in noise. And his explosion had finally come. Outside, lights flicked on in neighboring houses. Curtains shifted. Voices murmured in confusion. And then, faint but distinct, the sound of a door opening next door. Concerned voices carried across the yard. "Are you hearing this?" one neighbor whispered. "I think something's wrong over there," another answered. They could hear it all. The screams, the crashes, the chaos he could no longer contain. His secret had grown too heavy to carry, and now it had burst open for everyone to witness. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had hidden his betrayal so carefully, so deliberately. He thought he was clever, discreet, untouchable. Yet here he was, unraveling in front of the very people he had wanted to impress, to fool, to keep his image polished before. And I stood in the kitchen, my hands folded neatly in front of me, listening to the spectacle with the same composure one might have while listening to the rain. The neighbors' voices grew more urgent. Someone called his name from across the fence. Someone else muttered about calling for help, and still he screamed, his voice raw, his body crashing through the house like a storm that couldn't find land. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. Because this wasn't my collapse. It was his. And I wanted him to feel every second of it. When he finally stumbled into the kitchen, his face was pale, his eyes wild, his body trembling. I met his gaze with calm silence. He opened his mouth, desperate to speak, to explain, to lash out. But no words came. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temple, his hands shaking violently at his sides. He looked less like a man and more like a cornered animal, trapped by his own lies. And still, I said nothing. The quiet stretched between us, thicker than any scream, sharper than any accusation. It told him everything he needed to know, that I saw him, that I knew him, that he could no longer hide. The neighbors heard his final roar that night, a sound so broken it carried through the street, echoing off the houses, sending dogs into frenzied barking. And then came the silence, heavy, suffocating, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I turned away from him, picked up a glass from the counter and filled it with water. My hand didn't shake, my breath didn't falter, and as I sipped slowly, I thought only one thing. His secrets have finally collapsed, and I didn't have to say a single word. The truth is, I always knew it would come to this. Secrets have a way of eating a person alive, of twisting their insides until the body itself rebels. My husband thought he could hide, thought he could control the storm he had created. But storms don't obey commands. They build, they gather, and then, when you least expect it, they break. That night, the storm finally broke. The neighbors had heard enough. His screams, his pounding footsteps, the sounds of chaos spilling out of our home like thunder. His voice, so frantic, so desperate, tore through the walls, louder than any explanation I could have given. I didn't need to tell anyone what he had done, who he really was. His own unraveling did that for me. I stood at the window, my hands resting gently on the sill, watching as the lights flicked on one by one in the houses across the street. Curtains shifted. Silhouettes leaned closer to the glass. Concern grew into whispers, whispers into urgency. And then, I heard it. The neighbor's voice, sharp, clear, cutting through the night. "Call an ambulance!" It wasn't me who asked for help. I never lifted the phone. I never shouted into the darkness. I didn't need to. His collapse was loud enough for the world to hear, his pain visible enough for others to act. My silence was the most powerful thing in that moment. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens cut through the air. The sound grew louder, closer, pulsing like a heartbeat through the stillness of our neighborhood. Blue and red lights flashed against the walls of my home, splintering across the windows, painting the night in frantic colors. I remember standing there, calm, composed, watching those beams of light dance across the ceiling. They looked almost like fireworks, except there was no celebration, only collapse. The ambulance pulled into the street, its headlights slicing through the dark. Neighbors stepped out of their houses now, drawn by the noise, the chaos, the spectacle of it all. They gathered on sidewalks, some clutching their robes closed against the night air, others holding their children back by the shoulders. Their faces were painted in shades of shock, concern, and something else too. Curiosity. Because people always want to know what's happening behind closed doors. And tonight, my husband had ripped those doors wide open. The paramedics moved quickly, professional and focused, their boots striking the pavement in heavy thuds. They carried equipment, bags, stretchers. Their radios crackled with clipped words. This wasn't their first emergency, but for me, it was the first time I had seen my private life dragged so violently into the public eye. They entered the house, the smell of antiseptic clinging to their clothes, the urgency of their movements filling the rooms. My husband was on the floor by then, his body curled in agony, his face drenched with sweat. He tried to speak, his words broken, stumbling over themselves. He wanted to explain, to justify, to hide the truth even in the face of collapse. But the paramedics weren't interested in excuses. They saw only a body in distress, a man in need of help. And I saw karma. The neighbors pressed closer to the windows, whispering among themselves. "What happened?" one asked. "Is he sick?" another replied. "I heard shouting earlier. Something's not right." Their voices carried, hushed but urgent, like bees buzzing just beyond the glass. And all the while I stood still, my expression unreadable, my lips sealed. Because silence was my revenge. He had betrayed me, hidden things from me, treated me as though I were blind, deaf, incapable of knowing the truth. But here I was, watching the truth unfold without saying a word. He had always underestimated me, thought I would cry, scream, beg, accuse. Instead, I gave him something far worse. My silence, my stillness, my refusal to play the part of the broken wife. As the paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher, his eyes found mine. For a split second, I saw something in them. Not love, not regret, but recognition. He knew. He knew I had seen through him. He knew I had chosen this path, that I had orchestrated a reckoning without ever raising my voice. And that realization, that awareness, was heavier than any punishment I could have spoken aloud. The stretcher rolled past me, wheels clicking against the tile. The paramedics moved fast, calling out numbers, words I barely understood. His body trembled as they secured him, strapped him in, prepared to whisk him away. He tried once more to speak, his lips parting, but no sound came. Only a groan, low and pitiful, slipping into the air like smoke. I stepped aside, my movements slow, deliberate, giving them room to carry him through the doorway. The flashing lights outside grew brighter as they emerged, bathing the crowd of neighbors in shades of red and blue. Faces turned, whispers swelled, children gasped, women covered their mouths with their hands. The whole street watched as my husband was carried into the night. The irony was sharp. He had worked so hard to keep his secrets hidden, so desperate to control the image others had of him. But in the end, it wasn't me who exposed him. It was his own collapse, his own weakness, his own choices. And now, instead of being the man who stood tall, respected, admired, he was the man strapped to a stretcher carried out under flashing lights while the neighborhood stared. I followed them to the door, standing in the frame as the ambulance doors swung open. The stretcher slid inside, the metal groaning under its weight. The paramedics climbed in after him, their hands steady, their voices clipped. The neighbors looked at me then. Their eyes, wide and questioning, landed on my face, searching for answers. I could have given them a story, could have spun a tale of betrayal and pain, could have pointed to the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. But I didn't. I simply looked back at them, my face calm, unreadable, my silence louder than anything I could have said. Because silence doesn't just protect dignity, it sharpens it. And in that moment, I wanted them to see me not as a broken woman, but as a woman in control, untouched by the chaos raging around her. The ambulance doors slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the night. The sirens wailed once more, the lights blazed brighter, and then the vehicle pulled away, disappearing into the darkness. The neighbors lingered, murmuring, speculating, but I turned, closed my door, and let the silence settle back into the house. Inside, the quiet was different now. Not heavy, not suffocating, liberating. The air felt cleaner, lighter, as though the house itself had been purged of its secret. I stood in the middle of the living room, the echoes of the night still humming in my ears, and I reflected on everything that had led me here. Betrayal is a wound. It cuts deep, festers, makes you question everything you thought you knew. But betrayal can also be a mirror. It shows you who you are when faced with the truth. And I learned that I was not a woman who needed to scream, who needed to beg, who needed to fight. I was a woman who could let silence do the work for me. Revenge, I realized, doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in stillness. Sometimes it comes in the calm look of a woman who has seen the truth and chosen not to flinch. As the sirens faded into the distance, I whispered only to myself, "Karma always finds its way." And that night, it did. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't humiliate him with words. I simply let his own choices, his own betrayals collapse on top of him. And in the end, that silence spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Trust, once broken, can never be repaired to what it once was. You can glue it together, you can patch the cracks, but it will never look the same. It will always carry the scars of betrayal, the reminder that love is fragile when built on lies. That night, as the ambulance carried him away and the neighbors whispered in the shadows, I felt no need to explain, no need to defend, no need to justify. I stood in the calm of my own dignity, knowing that revenge had already done its work, quietly, powerfully, without a single word spoken, because sometimes revenge doesn't need fire. Sometimes it doesn't need fury. Sometimes all it takes is silence. And in my silence, he heard everything. This ending is sharp, reflective, and ties perfectly back to the theme of betrayal, dignity, and silent revenge.